All right. Well, welcome, Megan. Glad to have you at Boston by Foot and doing a guide profile for us. So, just to kind of kick things off, I was wondering if you could share a little bit about us, about you with us. Where are you from, or where do you live currently? How long have you been a Boston by Foot volunteer?
Sure. So I'm originally from Michigan and I grew up there, went to school there. After Michigan, I moved to Washington State, moved to Seattle, lived there for about a year and a half. And then at the end of 2020, I moved to Boston. So I've been here for a little bit over 4 years now, and I just completed my second year, second term as a Boston by Foot guide.
Wonderful. And so it's great to hear that you kind of came from other parts of the country, moved to Boston, were inspired to become a Boston by Foot volunteer. And kind of what intrigued you about Boston by Foot and why did you want to volunteer for us?
Yeah, so when I was in school, I was a tour guide. I feel like that probably starts a lot of people's interest. Um, and one of my coworkers actually, in my first job when I moved to Boston, was a Boston by Foot tour guide, and she led one of our resource groups at work on the Reinventing Boston tour. And I really enjoyed that tour. And just coincidentally, I had also read The Dark Tide. And so I was talking to Brooke about how I just read this, and she said, "Oh, we actually have a tour that goes and talks about the molasses flood through the North End. You should totally look into it and look into becoming a guide." So that's kind of what sparked, or that's how I heard about Boston by Foot, and then the rest is history.
That's great how, another Boston by Foot volunteer, kind of clued you into us and inspired you, and that you had read about books. So, are you like a history nerd? Do you identify as somebody who really loves history? And is that kind of why you read the book, or yeah?
No, not at all. I actually heard about this book because when I was in school, I studied material science, and I was taking a class called failure analysis. And one of the case studies that we did was about the tank breaking. So I was really curious, kind of from a different angle, about what happened in the molasses flood, and kind of coincidentally also happened in Boston. But beforehand, I really was not super interested in history, and moving to Boston made it a lot easier to become interested in it because we are, walking amongst, where a lot of very historic events happened. So it's really cool to be able to like be exactly where some of these events happened, but then I'm super excited and thankful for Boston by Foot because not only do I know that it happened here, but I actually know kind of what happened. Probably one other reason why I wanted to join was because I had a couple of people visiting me, and I know that the most common thing to do as a tourist is walk the Freedom Trail. And before becoming a guide, I would walk the Freedom Trail with some of my visitors and not have anything to say about any of these really historic stops that we stopped at. So really learning a lot about the things that I see every day has been super exciting, and also being able to share that with other people has been great.
Well, I'm so glad that your friends and family and visitors to Boston, are benefiting from it too, and that your time at Boston by Foot has really helped you gain a better knowledge and insight and what's under your feet in the city, so to speak. And so you mentioned that you give the dark side tour. Are there any other tours that you give at Boston by Foot?
Yes. So my first year, I learned the Dark Side Tour, and second year, I also learned Becoming Back Bay. So I lived in Back Bay. I just recently moved there, and so I wanted to learn a little bit more about the Back Bay history, and that's kind of what made me interested in learning that tour.
And what's kind of something you found of the Back Bay now that you've learned this tour? That's something that either you're really excited that you now know, or that people on your tours kind of are like, wow, that's really cool, or I wasn't sure about that.
Oh wow. I think, it's kind of interesting, like the motivations behind making Back Bay. I think everyone is when you first hear about the project of Back Bay, it is like undoubtedly a really big engineering feat that we were able to fill in the entirety, or not the entirety, but a lot of the Back Bay. But I think it's very like conflicting because you're pretty excited about all the advancements that had to happen to make this happen. But really the main driver for that was keeping the wealthy within Boston. So I think there's like a lot of mixed feelings about the history of Back Bay.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of complicated layers to Boston history in any of the tours we give, but yeah, the Back Bay, that's a great example. And now, now that you've been a guide for a couple of years and you've given a number of tours, you've learned new tours, do you have a favorite memory from a tour that you might like to share?
Ooh, I guess probably maybe this is like a demo tour that I took, if that's okay. And I know with my cohort that I was training with, we went on a tour of Charlestown. And then kind of at the very beginning of the tour, we were stopping by, I forgot this person's name. We were stopping by like a very historic house in Charlestown. And the woman who lives there happened to be outside, and she poked her head out and said, "Oh, are you giving a tour? What is this?" And then Dan, our tour guide, was kind of explaining what Boston by Foot was, and she said, "Oh, I actually live here if you want to come in and take a look inside the house." So I think you can read about the history of Boston all you want, but walking the tour and seeing all this lends itself to very unique experiences that maybe you wouldn't even have thought of when you signed up for the tour.
Absolutely. And you mentioned kind of training and the volunteer training program here at Boston by Foot and your cohort and how you guys have connected and gone on different tours. Is there a favorite memory or something that you found really interesting or that you weren't expecting about the training program that you might like to share?
Yeah, maybe maybe it's just because I was a little bit naive, and definitely the training for my university tour guide experience was not as extensive, but it was really ex- not exhaustive. That's maybe too much, but the training that Boston by Foot provided was very extensive, and so when I joined and when I kind of started this training program, I it was really daunting to think, oh, I actually have to know about Boston history because objectively something did happen here. I need to get the facts right. But at the end of the training, even though it was a lot of extra work, it was really interesting to kind of learn more about the history. The training was actually super immersive, so we were able to go to a lot of the spots that we were talking about. We have a bunch of mock tours, so by the end of it, even though at the very beginning I didn't know very much about Boston history, I felt very prepared to be able to give a tour. In this case, the dark side of Boston.
Wonderful. Yeah. I think preparedness is something that is a hallmark of Boston by Foot volunteer guides. And that's great to hear that you felt that the training program, adequately prepared you to go out and lead tours. So I know you're a volunteer tour guide here, but I also know you're involved in some of our other committees and activities at Boston by Foot. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your other Boston by Foot committee work and involvement?
Sure. So I also joined the strategic planning committee, which kind of looks at the 5-year plan of Boston by Foot, and then I'm also a member of the IDEA committee, talking about kind of like inclusivity, diversity, equity, accessibility, things like that.
And we're very glad to have you on both those committees, and all of your input and insight was really helpful to the, representing the volunteer voice in the strategic planning process. And I think the volunteer voice being integral throughout Boston by Foot and all that we do is really great. Is there any kind of favorite memory you have from any of your committee work that you'd like to tell us about?
Ooh, I mean, I think the like all hands or on-site activity for the strategic planning was really a fond memory that I had, because I think, like you said, I kind of bring in the volunteer perspective, but it was really interesting to kind of understand the staff perspective as well as the trustee perspective. So kind of having a more holistic understanding of the main goals of Boston by Foot. But then for the idea committee, I think that probably that memory is still to come. And we're getting ready to do some tabling events and things like that. And that's always something that I'm excited to be a part of, just because I really like being a part of Boston by Foot and being a volunteer. So hopefully being able to spread the word and share that with anyone who's interested. Really looking forward to that.
That's great. Yeah, excited to have these open houses that we're doing, and that the idea committee has really spearheaded, and hopefully we'll be able to connect with lots of folks throughout Boston, even more than we already do. And so we've talked a lot about kind of like your Boston by Foot involvement, but is there any hobbies or things that you enjoy doing when you're not at Boston by Foot that you might like to talk about?
Too many. I have a lot of hobbies. I really like to be outside. So that Boston by Foot is definitely, another way that I can be outside. I love to go skiing in the winter time. So now it's kind of getting cold, really excited for the snow to fall. In the summertime, I've been trying to get into rollerblading. I am not great at rollerblading. I don't know how to stop yet, but that's a work in progress. So yeah, I think anything related to outdoors, I do really enjoy.
Well, that's great that, Boston by Foot definitely outdoors, outdoors, outdoors. And this is just
Yep.
another extension of your great hobbies. And I have to say rollerblading. Wow. I don't think I
I
could.
know. Hopefully, maybe one day you'll let me give the tour on my rollerblades.
Yeah, right. All right. And kind of last question as we wrap up today. Is there anything else that you'd like to, folks to know about you, Megan, as a Boston by Foot volunteer guide or as a Bostonian?
I think Boston is the greatest city. It is so rich with history. It's so, it's very small, or not very small, but you can kind of walk so much of Boston and learn so much of it in just an afternoon. So I think something that I have really enjoyed taking advantage of as a Boston by Foot guide is being able to take other tours and kind of learn a lot about the history of Boston outside of the tours that I give. And I'm also looking forward to learning more tours as I continue to become a Boston tour guide. But I think really, the community is really excellent here. There's a lot of people in the tour guide community that are super knowledgeable about Boston history. They help write the tours, put together the training curriculum. And I think it was a little bit daunting at first to really not have any background or a really solid foundation in history prior to joining Boston by Foot, but everyone has been super helpful in kind of answering these questions and really knowledgeable. So it's a really great community to be a part of.
Well, thank you so much, Megan, for taking this time to do a guide profile. It's been great to kind of get to know you a little bit more and hear your experience with Boston by Foot. And we're so glad to have you here with us as a volunteer. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ethan.